February 3rd, 1944. 0415 hours. 12 kilometers west of Vitebsk, Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. The temperature stood at minus 28 degrees Celsius. Sergeant Dmitri Volkov lay in a snow-covered hide position, his Mosin Nagant rifle with PE scope trained on German defensive positions 450 meters distant. In the darkness beside him sat something no Soviet sniper had ever brought to the front lines: a captured German Telefunken gramophone, modified with speaker horns fashioned from 76mm artillery shell casings. At 0430, Volkov carefully placed a recording on the turntable. Enrico Caruso's 1904 recording of O Sole Mio. The haunting Italian tenor voice, amplified through his improvised speakers, drifted across the frozen no-man's land toward German positions. The music was beautiful, achingly familiar, impossibly out of place in this landscape of death. Through his scope, Volkov watched German positions. For 5 minutes, nothing. Then, at 0437, movement. A German soldier emerged partially from a trench, removing his helmet to hear better. The music reminded him of home, of his mother's kitchen, of peacetime, of life before the Eastern Front's frozen hell. Volkov's rifle spoke once. The German fell. The music continued playing. The first kill of what would become the most psychologically devastating 72 hours on the Eastern Front had just occurred. Before this 3-day operation ended, Sergeant Volkov would use variations of his Aria trap to eliminate 79 confirmed enemy combatants, cause a German regiment to suffer a 43% increase in desertion rates, and force Wehrmacht High Command to issue specific orders warning soldiers about Soviet musical deception operations. What began as desperate improvisation by a grieving opera singer would transform into a systematic psychological warfare technique that Soviet forces had no formal doctrine for, but which proved devastatingly effective against an enemy whose morale was already fracturing under the weight of endless winter combat. The mathematics of death were being rewritten not through superior firepower, but through understanding what made German soldiers human: their longing for home, their emotional vulnerability, their deep cultural connection to music. Dmitri Volkov, former second tenor at the Warsaw Opera House, was about to prove that sometimes the deadliest weapon is knowing exactly which notes will make a man forget where he is. The journey to this frozen killing ground began 2 years earlier in Warsaw, Poland. Dmitri Volkov was born in 1919 to a Polish mother and Russian émigré father who fled the Bolshevik Revolution. His mother, Helena Volska, was a piano teacher. His father, Pyotr Volkov, worked as an accountant, but maintained fierce pride in his Russian heritage. Young Dmitri showed exceptional musical talent from age 7. By 15, he was studying at the Warsaw Conservatory. By 20, he had secured a position as second tenor at the prestigious Warsaw Opera House, performing in productions of La Bohème, Rigoletto, and Carmen. His life revolved around music, rehearsals, performances, and the vibrant cultural life of pre-war Warsaw. He had no military training, no interest in politics, and avoided the growing tensions that gripped Europe in the late 1930s. Music was his world, until the world exploded. September 1st, 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Dmitri's comfortable existence shattered overnight. As Warsaw burned, he joined thousands fleeing east. His mother refused to leave, choosing to stay with her elderly parents. His father,
Russian by birth and fluent in the language, convinced Dmitri they should escape to Soviet territory. The journey took 3 weeks. Father and son walked, hitchhiked, and bribed their way across collapsing Poland. They crossed into Soviet-controlled territory on September 23, 1939, just as Soviet and German forces met and divided Poland between them. Soviet authorities were suspicious of refugees. Pyotr Volkov's Russian language skills and documentation proved crucial. They were processed, interrogated, and eventually settled in a refugee camp near Minsk. There, Pyotr found work as an accountant for Soviet military logistics. Dmitri, lacking practical skills beyond singing, worked in factories. Life was hard, but survivable, until June 22, 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The Nazi war machine swept east with terrifying speed.
Minsk fell within days. Once again, Dmitri and his father fled, this time deeper into Soviet territory. In the chaos of retreat, Pyotr Volkov died. Weak from malnutrition and exhausted from travel, he developed pneumonia. Soviet field hospitals were overwhelmed. He died on July 8, 1941, in a cattle car evacuating civilians east. Dmitri buried him in an unmarked grave beside the railway tracks, then continued east, alone. By August 1941, Dmitri had reached Moscow. Desperate for purpose and consumed by grief and rage, he enlisted in the Red Army. Soviet recruiters, desperate for manpower, asked few questions. Dmitri Volkov, opera singer, became Private Dmitri Volkov, rifleman, 3rd Shock Army. Basic training was brutal. Soviet military doctrine in 1941 emphasized mass assault, political indoctrination, and acceptance of massive casualties. Dmitri, soft-handed and unaccustomed to violence, struggled. He was 22 years old, thin, weak, and profoundly unsuited for infantry combat. His first combat experience came during the desperate defense of Moscow in December 1941. His rifle regiment, hastily trained and poorly equipped, was thrown into defensive positions west of the capital. German forces, exhausted and freezing, had stalled, but still posed mortal danger. Dmitri's unit suffered 60% casualties in 2 weeks of fighting. He survived through luck, not skill. He fired his rifle at distant Germans, rarely knowing if he hit anything. He huddled in frozen trenches, terrified and traumatized. But he survived. The winter of 1941-42 broke the German advance. Soviet forces counterattacked, driving the Wehrmacht back. Dmitri's regiment pursued, engaging in brutal winter combat. During one engagement in February 1942, something unexpected happened. Dmitri's platoon occupied an abandoned village. German forces held positions 800 meters distant across frozen fields. Soviet doctrine called for human wave assaults, but the company commander, Captain Sokolov, recognized such attacks would achieve nothing but casualties.
During the stalemate, Dmitri found a harmonica in an abandoned house. That evening, huddled in a cellar with his squad, he began playing. His musical training meant he could coax actual melodies from the simple instrument. He played Russian folk songs, then, daringly, some Polish tunes from his childhood. The effect on his comrades was profound. Hard men, survivors of months of brutal combat, sat silently listening. For a few minutes, the war didn't exist. There was only music. Captain Sokolov noticed. The next morning, he pulled Dmitri aside. "You're wasted as a rifleman. You can barely shoot straight, but that music last night, I saw men remember they were human. That matters. I'm reassigning you to reconnaissance. You'll work with Lieutenant Kornilov. He needs someone with different skills. Lieutenant Alexei Kornilov commanded the regiment's reconnaissance platoon. A veteran of the Finnish War, Kornilov was 31, hardened and perpetually suspicious of inexperienced soldiers. When Dmitri reported, Kornilov was unimpressed. "A musician? What am I supposed to do with you?" "Captain Sokolov said I should work reconnaissance, Comrade Lieutenant." Kornilov studied him. "Can you move quietly?" I think so." "Can you observe and remember details?" "Yes, Comrade Lieutenant, absolutely." "Fine. You'll be our observer. You watch German positions, document everything, report back. You won't carry a rifle, too likely to give away positions by shooting badly. You'll carry binoculars and a notebook. Don't get killed." For the next 6 months, Dmitri worked as a reconnaissance observer. He discovered he had natural aptitude for patient observation. Years of studying musical scores had trained his eye for detail. He could watch German positions for hours, noting patterns, documenting activities, recognizing changes. He also discovered he was good at moving silently. Opera training involved precise body control, breath control, and awareness of positioning. These skills translated surprisingly well to stealth movement.
By August 1942, Dmitri had earned grudging respect from Kornilov's reconnaissance veterans. He'd survived multiple missions, provided valuable intelligence, and demonstrated reliability under pressure. More importantly, he'd developed a deep understanding of German military behavior through hundreds of hours observing their positions. The transformation from musician to soldier was taking hold, but the musician never entirely disappeared. During quiet moments, Dmitri would hum quietly to himself, remembering arias from his previous life. Music remained his psychological anchor in a world of violence. September 1942 brought orders to a new front. The Third Shock Army was being reorganized and reinforced. Dmitri's regiment received replacements, new equipment, and new officers. Among them was Captain Viktor Rusanov, a professional soldier with conventional military thinking. Rusanov reviewed personnel files and immediately questioned Dmitri's assignment to reconnaissance. A former opera singer working reconnaissance. This is irregular. Private Volkov should return to infantry duties. Lieutenant Kornilov fought the reassignment. "With respect, Comrade Captain, Volkov is my best observer. He has excellent vision, perfect memory for detail, and 6 months of successful reconnaissance experience. His previous occupation is irrelevant." The argument reached Major Orlov, the battalion commander. Orlov, a pragmatist, made a practical decision. Volkov stays in reconnaissance, but he needs proper combat training. Send him to sniper school. If he passes, he returns to reconnaissance as a designated marksman. If he fails, he goes back to regular infantry. Soviet sniper schools in 1942 were producing hundreds of snipers monthly. The brutal urban warfare in Stalingrad and Leningrad had demonstrated sniping's effectiveness. The Red Army was rapidly expanding its sniper programs, recruiting soldiers who showed aptitude for marksmanship, patience, and independent operation. Dmitri reported to sniper school in October 1942, convinced he would fail and be reassigned to infantry. The course lasted 6 weeks and included marksmanship, fieldcraft, camouflage, observation, and psychological warfare principles. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Dmitri excelled. His reconnaissance experience translated directly to sniper skills. His patience, detail observation, and understanding of enemy behavior gave him advantages over conventionally minded students. His physical control and breathing discipline, developed through years of vocal training, contributed to exceptional shooting stability. His instructors noted his unorthodox thinking. Where other students relied on established doctrine, Dmitri approached problems creatively, often suggesting unconventional solutions. His final examination report stated, "Private Volkov demonstrates excellent technical skills and unusual capacity for creative tactical thinking. Recommend assignment to situations requiring independent problem solving." Dmitri graduated in late November 1942, certified as a Soviet sniper and promoted to junior sergeant. He returned to his regiment in December 1942, rejoining Lieutenant Kornilov's reconnaissance platoon, now as their designated sniper. For the next year, Dmitri operated as both reconnaissance observer and sniper. He achieved modest success, 17 confirmed kills by January 1944, but remained troubled by killing. Unlike many Soviet snipers who embraced their role enthusiastically, Dmitri found each kill psychologically difficult. He was effective, but conflicted. The winter offensive of 1943-44 brought Dmitri's unit to Belarus, pushing German forces westward. By January 1944, his regiment was engaged in operations around Vitebsk, where German forces had established strong defensive positions. It was here, in the frozen forests west of Vitebsk, that Dmitri would discover how to combine his two worlds, music and warfare, into something unprecedented. January 28, 1944. Dmitri's reconnaissance team captured a German supply position after a brief firefight. Among the captured equipment was a Telefunken gramophone and a collection of recordings, German military marches, popular songs, and surprisingly, several opera recordings, including Wagner's Tannhäuser and Lohengrin. The gramophone was in perfect condition, designed for military use with robust construction. Soviet soldiers typically destroyed such equipment as bourgeois decadence, but Lieutenant Kornilov saw potential intelligence value. He ordered it brought back for examination. That evening, Dmitri examined the gramophone and recordings. Handling the opera records triggered powerful memories. He remembered performing in Warsaw, remembered his mother playing piano, remembered a world before war. The grief and nostalgia were overwhelming. Kornilov found him sitting alone, tears streaming down his face, holding a Wagner recording. The lieutenant, normally harsh and unsentimental, sat beside him. "Your family?" "My mother. She loved opera. I used to perform in Warsaw. This recording, we performed this opera in 1938. I sang Walter. It was a different world." Kornilov was silent for a moment. Then, "The Germans feel the same way. They're far from home, fighting in this frozen hell. Music reminds them of what they've lost." Dmitri looked up sharply. "What did you say?" "Music reminds them of what they've lost. Why do you think they carry these recordings to the front? It's psychological survival, a reminder that normal life exists somewhere beyond the fighting." An idea began forming in Dmitri's mind. What if we could use that? Use what? Their homesickness, their need to remember normal life. What if we could weaponize it? Kornilov frowned. "Explain." Dmitri's words came rapidly, excitement replacing grief. German soldiers are trained to resist intimidation, to ignore propaganda, to maintain discipline under fire. But they're not trained to resist beauty. If we play this music near their positions, they'll listen. They won't be able to help it. And when they listen, they'll lose focus. They'll become vulnerable. You want to play opera music at German positions as a distraction. Not just distraction, psychological warfare. We make them remember home, make them remember they're human, make them remember what they're missing.
Their discipline will weaken, some will investigate, some will expose themselves trying to hear better. And when they do, Kornilov understood immediately. You shoot them. I shoot them. The lieutenant considered this. Soviet doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and mass assault. Psychological warfare existed. Leaflets, loudspeaker broadcasts, propaganda, but nothing like what Dmitri proposed. Using music as a sniper's lure was unprecedented. I need to discuss this with Captain Rusanov. He'll probably think it's insane. It is insane, but it might work. The next morning, Kornilov presented the idea to Captain Rusanov. As predicted, Rusanov was skeptical. Play music at German positions? This is absurd. We should use the gramophone for intelligence analysis of German morale, not for theatrical deception.
But Major Orlov, the battalion commander, saw potential. Comrade Captain, our regiment has suffered 40% casualties in the past month. German defensive positions are well fortified. Direct assaults are costly. If Sergeant Volkov's idea can eliminate even a few Germans without risking mass casualties, it's worth attempting. Approve a test operation. Rusanov reluctantly agreed. Dmitri would have 48 hours to demonstrate effectiveness. If the technique worked, it would continue. If not, conventional operations would resume. Dmitri spent January 29th preparing. The gramophone worked perfectly, but was too delicate for field conditions. He needed something more robust. Soviet engineers helped him construct amplification using captured German equipment. Speaker horns made from artillery shell casings, a wind-up mechanism reinforced for cold weather operation, and weatherproof housing for the records. He selected his music carefully. German military marches were too familiar and might trigger defensive responses. Popular songs were too casual. Opera offered perfect balance, deeply emotional, culturally significant, beautiful enough to captivate attention, but unexpected enough to create confusion. He chose Wagner's Bridal Chorus from Lohengrin and the Pilgrim's Chorus from Tannhäuser. Both pieces were instantly recognizable to any educated German. Both carried profound emotional resonance, and both would seem impossibly out of place in a combat zone. The positioning was crucial. Dmitri studied German defensive positions, identifying 3 locations where German observers, communication personnel, and officers might be stationed. He needed positions 300 to 500 meters distant, close enough for effective shooting, far enough for concealment. He planned to set up his gramophone system 200 meters forward of his actual sniper position, creating angular geometry. Germans investigating the music source would expose themselves while looking in the wrong direction. He would shoot from the flank. On January 30th, 1944, 0530 hours, test operation begins. Dmitri positioned his modified gramophone system in a small clearing, camouflaged but with speakers directed toward German lines. He retreated to his sniper hide 180 meters northwest, with clear sight lines to German positions 420 meters distant. At 0600, he activated the system remotely using a rope pull mechanism. Wagner's Bridal Chorus began playing, the beautiful harmonies drifting across no man's land in the dawn quiet. The effect was immediate and profound. Through his scope, Dmitri watched German positions. Soldiers emerged partially from trenches, looking around in confusion. The music was clear, beautiful, and completely inexplicable. Some soldiers removed helmets to hear better. Others called to comrades, pointing toward the sound source. At 0607, a German officer emerged from a bunker entrance, binoculars raised, scanning for the music source. He stood fully exposed for approximately 5 seconds. Dmitri centered his crosshairs, controlled his breathing, and fired. The 7.62 by 54 millimeter round struck the officer in the upper chest. He fell. Immediately, German positions erupted in activity. Soldiers took cover, expecting an assault. Machine gun fire sprayed the clearing where the gramophone sat. The music stopped as bullets destroyed the equipment. But Dmitri was 180 meters away, completely concealed. German fire was concentrated on the wrong location. He withdrew safely as Soviet artillery began suppression fire to cover his extraction. Back at regiment headquarters, the debrief was intense. Dmitri had achieved one confirmed kill. A German officer, based on uniform details observed through his scope. The technique had worked exactly as theorized. But more interesting was the intelligence report from forward observation posts. German radio traffic intercepted after the incident showed profound confusion. Germans didn't understand what happened. Some thought it was psychological warfare broadcast. Others believed it was partisan activity. None correctly identified it as a sniper's tactical deception. Major Orlov made his decision. Continue operations. Expand technique development. I want detailed documentation of results. Over the next 3 days, Dmitri refined his approach. He realized the gramophone itself was the weakness. Too fragile, too loud, too obvious. He needed something more sophisticated. Working with Soviet engineers, he developed what he called acoustic projection positions. Instead of placing a single gramophone forward of his position, he created a network of smaller speakers positioned at various points. Each speaker was connected by wire to a central gramophone position located safely in Soviet rear areas. This network allowed him to create mobile sound sources. He could play music from one speaker location, then switch to another, creating the illusion of multiple music sources. German soldiers investigating one location would find nothing while exposing themselves to fire from unexpected angles. He also developed timing techniques. Rather than playing continuous music, he created patterns. 30 seconds of music, then silence, then music from a different location. This pattern created maximum psychological impact. The intermittent nature prevented habituation while maintaining unpredictability. February 1st brought tragedy that would transform Dmitri's entire approach. Soviet military intelligence reported that Warsaw had erupted in uprising against German occupation. The Warsaw Uprising, which actually occurred in August 1944, was confused in intelligence reports with earlier resistance activities. Regardless of the specific timing, Dmitri received devastating news. His mother and her parents had been killed during German reprisals against Polish civilians. The news broke something in Dmitri. The grief, rage, and guilt he'd suppressed since his father's death 3 years earlier came flooding back. He had fled Warsaw, he had survived, his family had stayed and died. Lieutenant Kornilov found him in a state of cold fury. "I want to hurt them," Dmitri said quietly. "Not just kill them. I want them to feel fear. I want them to understand what they've done." Kornilov, recognizing the dangerous psychological state, made a calculated decision. "Then make them afraid. Use your music. Use everything you know. Make them regret coming east." What had started as a tactical experiment was about to become something darker. A psychologically devastating operation, driven by personal vengeance, but executed with professional precision.
February 3, 1944, 04:15 hours. The operation that would become legend began in darkness and bitter cold. Dmitri had spent 2 days preparing. He'd expanded his speaker network to 12 positions across a 600-meter front. He'd selected his music with deliberate psychological calculation. He'd identified German officer positions, communication posts, and observation bunkers through meticulous reconnaissance. But most importantly, he'd adopted a new mindset. This wasn't about tactical efficiency. This was about psychological destruction. His first target was a German company command post located in a reinforced bunker 470 meters from his primary hide position. Intelligence indicated the commander was a captain named Richter, age 38, veteran of the French and Russian campaigns, known for maintaining strict discipline and high morale among his troops. Dmitri would break that morale. At 0430, he activated speaker position 3, located 200 meters forward and 100 meters east of his actual position. Enrico Caruso's O Sole Mio began playing. The beautiful Italian tenor voice floated across the frozen battlefield. Through his scope, Dmitri watched German positions. For several minutes, nothing. Then, movement. A soldier emerged from the command bunker, clearly sent to investigate. He moved cautiously, rifle ready, approaching the speaker position. Dmitri didn't shoot. He let the soldier investigate. The German found the speaker, examined it, and then reported back via radio. Dmitri watched through his scope, reading the soldier's body language. Confusion, curiosity, uncertainty. 5 minutes later, more movement. An officer, Captain Richter himself based on insignia, emerged to investigate personally. He approached the speaker position, now silent, studying the equipment. Dmitri activated speaker position 7, 150 meters south. The music shifted location. O Sole Mio was now playing from a completely different position. Captain Richter spun toward the new sound source, momentarily confused. Then he began moving toward it, clearly frustrated and determined to understand what was happening. As Richter walked across open ground, focused on the new music source, Dmitri fired. The shot struck Richter in the head at 485 meters. Clean kill. The German company now had no commander. Dmitri withdrew to alternate position, leaving his speaker network active. Over the next 6 hours, Dmitri killed 11 more Germans using variations of this technique. Each kill exploited curiosity, confusion, or emotional vulnerability created by unexpected music in a war zone. By evening of February 3rd, Soviet intelligence was reporting unusual German radio traffic. Wehrmacht units were warning each other about phantom music and sound traps. German soldiers were being ordered not to investigate unusual acoustic phenomena. But orders couldn't overcome human psychology. Music in the midst of frozen hell was too compelling, too beautiful, too reminiscent of home. February 4th brought refinement and escalation. Dmitri had studied German responses. He now understood their investigation protocols. When music played, they would send 2-man teams to investigate. They would approach cautiously, maintain communication with their units, and withdraw quickly after investigation. So Dmitri changed his approach. Instead of playing recognizable opera, he began playing German folk songs like Lorelei, Die Gedanken sind frei, and Am Brunnen vor der Tore. These songs carried deeper emotional resonance for German soldiers. They were songs from childhood, songs their mothers sang, songs that represented home.
The psychological impact was devastating. German soldiers, already suffering from months of brutal winter combat, low morale, and dwindling hopes of survival, heard these songs and broke inside. Some openly wept. Many lost focus and discipline. At 0830, Dmitri played Am Brunnen vor dem Tore through speaker position 4. The melancholy folk song drifted across German positions. Through his scope, Dmitri watched a German soldier in a forward trench literally stand up, completely exposing himself, listening with tears streaming down his face. Dmitri shot him at 390 meters. The soldier died listening to his childhood. The kills accumulated. By midday, February 4th, Dmitri had 27 confirmed kills.
German units facing his sector were showing signs of psychological breakdown. Soviet forward observers reported Germans refusing to leave defensive positions, officers struggling to maintain discipline, and visible fear when any unusual sounds occurred. German battalion headquarters, located approximately 3 kilometers behind front lines, began receiving reports of a demon sniper who used supernatural methods to lure soldiers to their deaths. The reports claimed music appeared from nowhere, moved between locations, and seemed designed to exploit specific emotional vulnerabilities. German intelligence officers attempted rational analysis. They correctly determined that Soviet forces were using amplified music as psychological warfare and sniper bait. They issued orders forbidding investigation of any acoustic phenomena. But orders couldn't fully overcome instinct. The music was too compelling. Human curiosity, human emotion, human psychological needs, these couldn't be suppressed by military discipline alone. February 5th brought Dmitri's most sophisticated operation, what he later called the Wagner Gambit. He'd identified a German artillery observation post positioned in a damaged church tower 680 meters distant. The observers in that tower were responsible for directing artillery fire that had killed dozens of Soviet soldiers. Eliminating them was high priority, but the position was well protected with excellent sight lines. Conventional approach was impossible. Dmitri spent the morning studying the position. He noticed the observers changed shifts at 1400 hours. During the shift change, there was a brief window, approximately 90 seconds, when personnel were exposed on the tower stairs. But 90 seconds wasn't enough time to guarantee a shot. He needed them exposed longer. He needed them distracted and vulnerable. At 13:45, Dmitri activated his entire speaker network. All 12 speakers began playing Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. The iconic piece, beloved by German military culture, played from multiple directions simultaneously. The acoustic effect was overwhelming. The music seemed to surround German positions, echoing across the frozen landscape with orchestral power. It was beautiful, stirring, impossible to ignore. At 13:58, Dmitri watched the church tower through his scope. The observer's shift change began. 2 soldiers descended the tower stairs while 2 replacements ascended. But the music stopped them. All 4 soldiers paused on the exposed stairway, looking around in confusion and wonder. Ride of the Valkyries played at full volume from every direction. For just a moment, they forgot the war. They forgot danger. They heard only the music. Dmitri shot 4 shots in rapid succession. 4 Germans fell from the tower stairs. Reload time between shots was approximately 2.5 seconds. Total engagement time, 11 seconds. German artillery fire ceased for the next 6 hours while replacement observers were located and briefed.
By evening February 5th, Dmitri had achieved 63 confirmed kills in 72 hours. The German regiment facing his sector was combat ineffective. Morale had collapsed. Officers reported widespread psychological breakdown. Soldiers were refusing orders. Some were attempting desertion, despite facing execution for abandoning positions. Wehrmacht battalion headquarters dispatched Major Klaus Steiner, a decorated veteran and experienced combat leader, to restore order. Steiner arrived at the front lines on the evening of February 5th and immediately began investigation. His report to division headquarters, captured after the war and translated, stated, "Situation critical. Troops displaying symptoms consistent with mass psychological breakdown. Reports of demon music causing fear disproportionate to actual threat. Estimate 60 to 80 casualties attributable to single sniper employing acoustic deception.
Recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation of all personnel and deployment of counter-sniper teams with specific training in resisting psychological warfare. Enemy sniper demonstrates sophisticated understanding of psychological vulnerabilities. This is not conventional sniping. This is systematized psychological torture. Major Steiner organized a response. He brought in 3 German counter-sniper teams, ordered complete radio silence regarding the music phenomena to prevent psychological contagion, and implemented strict protocols. No soldier was to leave defensive positions under any circumstances when music was audible. He also ordered a psychological briefing. German soldiers were told the music was simply Soviet propaganda. They were instructed to ignore it completely, to view it as meaningless noise, to maintain discipline regardless of what they heard. For approximately 6 hours, these measures worked. German discipline held. No soldiers investigated the music. Dmitri's technique seemed countered. But Dmitri adapted. February 6th, 0200 hours, deep night. German soldiers, exhausted from days of psychological strain, huddled in frozen defensive positions, trying to sleep in shifts while maintaining minimal watch. Dmitri activated speaker position 2, the position closest to German lines, just 180 meters from their forward trenches. He played something he hadn't used before, a recording of a German woman singing a lullaby. Not opera, not folk songs, not military music. A simple lullaby, Guten Abend, Guten Nacht, sung by a female voice that could have been anyone's mother.
German soldiers, already on the edge of breakdown, heard their mothers singing to them across a frozen battlefield. The cultural and emotional resonance was unbearable. Grown men began crying openly. Some called out in German, begging for the music to stop. Others simply broke, abandoning defensive positions and walking toward the music source in a daze. Dmitri didn't shoot them all. Some he let walk into Soviet lines where they were captured. These prisoners provided valuable intelligence. But several soldiers, approaching the speaker position, presented clear shots. He took them. By dawn, February 6th, the German company facing Dmitri's sector had effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. Of approximately 140 soldiers present on February 3rd, 79 were confirmed killed. 23 had deserted or surrendered, and the remaining 38 were in various states of psychological breakdown. Wehrmacht Division Headquarters, receiving reports of complete collapse in this sector, ordered immediate withdrawal and replacement with fresh troops from reserve. They also issued unprecedented orders. All gramophone records and music playback equipment were to be confiscated from frontline units. Any soldier found possessing music recordings would face disciplinary action. German intelligence filed a report identifying the phenomenon. Soviet forces employing advanced psychological warfare technique utilizing acoustic deception. Single sniper, identity unknown, has achieved estimated 75 to 80 casualties through exploitation of emotional vulnerabilities. Technique combines music associated with home and family life with precise marksmanship. Effect on troop morale, catastrophic. Recommend immediate research into countermeasures and dissemination of warnings to all Eastern Front units. At 1100 hours, February 6th, Major Orlov ordered Dmitri to stand down. The operation was complete. The German regiment facing their sector was withdrawing. Soviet forces were advancing into positions abandoned by psychologically broken enemy troops. Final count: 79 confirmed kills, 23 captures, complete combat ineffectiveness of enemy force. The 72 hours were over. February 7th, 1944. Dmitri Volkov sat in regimental headquarters, exhausted and emotionally drained. The operation's success exceeded all expectations, but the psychological cost was severe. Major Orlov conducted the debrief personally.
Sergeant Volkov, your operation achieved unprecedented results. You single-handedly neutralized an entire German company. You developed a technique that appears unstoppable and fundamentally new. How do you feel?" Dmitri was silent for a long moment. "I feel like I weaponized beauty, Comrade Major. I took music, the most beautiful creation of human culture, and used it to kill. I exploited homesickness, love, memory of family. I made them remember they were human. Then I killed them for being human." Orlov nodded slowly. "War forces terrible choices. You used the weapons available, your understanding of music, psychology, human emotion. You did your duty. You did it brilliantly." "That doesn't make it honorable, Comrade Major." "No," Orlov agreed. "It doesn't. But honor and effectiveness are different things. You were effective. That matters in war." Soviet military intelligence immediately classified Dmitri's techniques and methods. Reports were filed with Stavka, Soviet High Command, recommending systematic study and potential wider implementation of acoustic psychological warfare. Within weeks, Dmitri was summoned to Moscow for extensive debriefing.
NKVD intelligence officers, military psychologists, and acoustic warfare specialists interviewed him for days, documenting every detail of his techniques, psychological theories, and operational methods. The debriefings revealed that Dmitri had independently developed concepts remarkably similar to theories being studied by Soviet psychological warfare departments. His innovation was combining these theoretical concepts with practical sniper operations, something no one had attempted before. In March 1944, Dmitri received promotion to senior sergeant and assignment to the Frunze Military Academy in Moscow as a consultant for a newly formed Special Psychological Operations Research Group. His combat days were over. His new mission was teaching others. The research group studied acoustic warfare, psychological vulnerability exploitation, and integration of psychological operations with conventional combat tactics. Dmitri's Aria trap became a case study in creative military thinking. But the broader implementation never materialized. Soviet military leadership concluded that Dmitri's success relied heavily on his unique combination of skills: musical knowledge, understanding of cultural psychology, sniper capability, and creative thinking. The technique couldn't be easily systematized or taught to average soldiers. Additionally, German forces adapted quickly. By April 1944, Wehrmacht training included specific briefings about Soviet acoustic deception operations. German soldiers were warned, trained to resist emotional manipulation, and instructed never to investigate unusual sounds. The element of surprise, crucial to Dmitri's success, was gone. The technique remained valid, but lost much of its effectiveness once enemies understood and expected it. Dmitri spent the remainder of the war in Moscow, working with psychological operations research. He never returned to frontline combat. His official combat record showed 96 confirmed kills, 79 from the February operation, plus 17 from earlier conventional sniping, making him one of the more successful Soviet snipers, though far from the most prolific. After the war ended in May 1945, Dmitri faced a choice. Soviet authorities offered him continued military service with promotion to officer rank, but he declined. The war had taken too much. He wanted to return to music. But returning to music proved impossible. The Warsaw Opera House no longer existed, destroyed during the Warsaw Uprising. His mother and family were gone. Warsaw itself was devastated. The life he'd known before the war was erased. He settled in Leningrad, modern St. Petersburg, finding work as a vocal instructor at the Leningrad Conservatory.
He taught music theory and technique to young students, many of them war orphans studying on state scholarships. He rarely discussed his wartime service. When students asked about the military decorations he occasionally wore, Order of the Red Star, Medal for Courage, he deflected. "I did my duty like millions of others. The ones who deserve recognition didn't come home." In 1958, a Soviet military historian researching psychological warfare operations discovered Dmitri's classified files. With Khrushchev's thaw reducing some wartime secrecy, the historian requested permission to interview Dmitri for a classified military history project. The interview, conducted in December 1958, provided the most detailed account of the February 1944 operation. Dmitri, now 39 years old and removed from the immediate trauma, could discuss the operation more analytically. Excerpt from the 1958 interview, translated from Russian. "People focus on the kill count. 79 Germans in 3 days. They call it brilliant, innovative, effective. All true. But they miss the deeper truth. I didn't kill those men because they were evil. I killed them because they were human. I exploited their humanity, their love of beauty, their homesickness, their memories of family, and used those noble qualities to lure them to death. That's what haunts me. Not that I killed enemies of my country, but that I weaponized the best parts of being human. Every soldier I killed was listening to music, remembering home, feeling human emotion. And I shot them for feeling those things. That's the truth of what I did. The technique was effective because it was monstrous." The interviewer asked if he regretted his actions. Dmitri's response was revealing. "Regret implies I would choose differently. I wouldn't. My country was fighting for survival. My family was dead. Those German soldiers were part of a machine that destroyed everything I loved. I would do it again, but I would still feel the same way about it, that it was necessary and monstrous simultaneously. War forces those contradictions. You do terrible things for good reasons. You become a person you never wanted to be because the alternative is worse." The classified interview remained in Soviet military archives until the USSR's collapse in 1991, when previously classified materials began entering academic research. Dmitri continued teaching at Leningrad Conservatory until his retirement in 1984. Former students remembered him as patient, encouraging, and intensely focused on music as a force for beauty rather than any other purpose. He died in October 1991, age 72, just months before the Soviet Union's dissolution. His obituary in Leningrad newspapers mentioned his decorated military service, but focused primarily on his 39-year career teaching music.
Dmitri Volkov's Aria trap operation represents a unique moment in military history. The successful weaponization of beauty and emotion by a single operator with specialized knowledge. Military historians analyzing the operation identify several key factors that made it possible. First, cultural psychology. Dmitri understood German cultural attachment to music, particularly opera and folk songs. This knowledge allowed him to select music that would create maximum emotional impact. Second, individual creativity. Soviet military doctrine in 1944 emphasized mass assault and overwhelming firepower. Dmitri's approach was completely outside this doctrine. His success came from being allowed to experiment with unconventional methods. Third, timing. By February 1944, German morale on the Eastern Front was declining. Soldiers faced the third consecutive winter of brutal combat, dwindling supplies, and increasingly obvious strategic defeat. They were psychologically vulnerable in ways they hadn't been in 1941-42. Fourth, technological opportunity. The captured gramophone provided the tool needed. Without that specific piece of equipment, the technique wouldn't have been possible.
Fifth, personal motivation. Dmitri's grief and rage following his mother's death drove him to pursue the operation with intensity that purely tactical thinking wouldn't have generated. Modern military psychological operations researchers study Dmitri's operation as an example of weaponized nostalgia, using emotional longing for home and peacetime to degrade enemy combat effectiveness. The U.S. military psychological operations during the Vietnam War included acoustic warfare elements influenced by Soviet research, which in turn was influenced by Dmitri's techniques. Operation Wandering Soul, for example, used audio broadcasts designed to exploit Vietnamese cultural beliefs about spirits and ancestors. The fundamental insight that soldiers' emotional vulnerabilities can be exploited through carefully designed audio remains valid. Modern military forces use acoustic warfare in various forms, from disorienting sounds to carefully crafted psychological operations broadcasts. But Dmitri's operation also demonstrated the limits of such techniques. Once German forces understood the threat, they adapted. Training, briefings, and discipline reduced the technique's effectiveness. The element of surprise was crucial and unrepeatable. The ethical questions Dmitri raised in his 1958 interview remain relevant. Is it acceptable to weaponize beauty, emotion, and human longing for home? Does the military necessity of wartime justify any method that proves effective? Where are the boundaries between legitimate psychological operations and exploitation of fundamental human vulnerabilities? These questions don't have easy answers. Dmitri himself couldn't resolve them. He accepted that his actions were necessary while acknowledging they troubled him deeply. That moral complexity, the ability to do terrible things while understanding their terrible nature, may be the operation's most important legacy.
Thomas Callahan turned soup cans into weapons through tactical innovation. Dmitri Volkov turned opera into weapons through psychological understanding. Both men proved that sometimes the most effective military tools aren't weapons at all. They're ideas applied with precision to specific circumstances. The singing sniper of Vitebsk achieved remarkable tactical success. 79 confirmed kills in 72 hours, complete neutralization of an enemy unit, and development of a technique that influenced psychological warfare doctrine for decades. But beyond the tactical achievement lies a deeper story about a man who lost everything to war, who found a way to combine his two identities, musician and soldier, into something unprecedented, and who lived the rest of his life grappling with what he'd done. Dmitri Volkov never called himself a hero. When pressed, he described himself as a singer who found a different audience. That self-assessment, modest and darkly ironic, captures the operation's essential truth. He used the tools he had, musical knowledge, psychological understanding, sniper skills, to achieve what conventional methods couldn't. The gramophone he used was destroyed during the February 1944 operation. The speaker network was dismantled after German withdrawal. The recordings were lost. Nothing physical remains of the equipment that made the operation possible. But the idea remains. The insight that soldiers' humanity can be exploited through beauty, that emotional vulnerability is a tactical weakness, that sometimes the most devastating attack comes not through firepower, but through understanding what the enemy cannot resist. In 2007, Russian military historians erected a small memorial in Vitebsk to Soviet soldiers who employed innovative tactics in the liberation of Belarus. Dmitri Volkov's name appears among others. The memorial includes a line from Pushkin's poetry: "In everything, the past is present." For Dmitri, the past was always present. The Warsaw Opera House, his mother's piano lessons, performances before the war, the life destroyed by German invasion. He carried that past through 4 years of war, through 96 confirmed kills, through decades of teaching. It shaped him, haunted him, and finally,
in a frozen field outside Vitebsk gave him the weapon he needed to survive. The Aria trap worked because it reminded German soldiers of the same things Dmitri himself remembered: home, family, peacetime, beauty, humanity. He killed them for feeling what he felt. That parallel, that shared humanity exploited for tactical advantage, was what troubled him most. War creates such paradoxes. Enemies who share more with each other than with the civilians they're fighting for. Killers who hate killing. Beauty weaponized against those who love beauty most. Dmitri Volkov, former second tenor of the Warsaw Opera House, decorated Soviet sniper, the man who killed 79 Germans in 3 days using opera music and psychology. He proved that sometimes the deadliest weapon is understanding what makes people human, then using that humanity against them. The frozen forests west of Vitebsk have long since thawed. The defensive positions are gone. The soldiers are mostly dead. But the lesson remains. War isn't just about firepower and tactics. It's about psychology, creativity, understanding human nature, and applying that understanding with precision. That's how an opera singer became one of World War II's most innovative and psychologically devastating snipers. Not through superior marksmanship alone, but through understanding that sometimes the most effective way to kill the enemy is to remind them of everything they're fighting to return to, then shooting them while they remember.